Hello and welcome to the teaching webinar to help you prepare for a virtual interview. My name is Stuart McLaughlin. I'm a recently retired principal from the London Borough of Havering, and I'm going to take you through a PowerPoint presentation that will give you the main tips and key things to consider to prepare and be successfully interviewed when the time comes. So we are indeed living in very strange times with schools closed. So obviously the traditional way of interviewing you with a lesson observation followed by an interview with the head teacher and possibly the head of department, they can't take place. So schools are relying on virtual interviews in order to make sure they can fulfill their vacancies for September. And schools are still recruiting, so they still will need to go through that process. So hopefully this presentation will help you actually prepare for that very different type of interview. I'm a head teacher with many years of experience across 4 different schools in 2 local authorities. And one thing I've done during that time is interviewed lots of people for different posts within the school. And the purpose of this is really to give you the head teacher's perspective, so you know what we are looking for when people apply to our schools. And teaching will help you. They will help you exclusively support NQTs into posts in schools in London and across the whole of England. And in doing so, you'll be employed by the school and you'll be paid on the national pay scale. Teaching will listen to you and they will try and connect you to the right type of school based on your personal preferences, your skills and experience. They can also support you if you need to relocate, because it may well be the school that you want to work in is outside the area where you live or the area where you've been training. And they will also give you access to the Spark Hire video platform to help you create a professional video interview. So the process I'm going to go through, I'm going to help you understand what you need to do to prepare so that you're fully prepared for the interview itself. You understand the school that you've applied to, that you're very professional in all that you do during the interview. You understand the types of questions that you might be asked, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to answer those questions succinctly so that you give yourself the best chance of being successful. And then we need to think about other things like you may be asked to present resources or prepare resources, because obviously without the actual lesson observation, schools may look at other ways to actually check that you've actually got the knowledge and understanding that they're looking for. So the big difference about a virtual interview is obviously you'll be sitting at home somewhere or somewhere where you've got access to the internet. And it's really important that you check out the platform that's being used for the interview, so you make sure that it works and that you actually can present yourself in the best way. And I was recently interviewing a candidate on a platform and their internet connection wasn't particularly good, which meant that they kept dropping out. So I couldn't hear their full answers. We kept talking over each other, which made it very, very difficult. So checking out the platform to make sure you've got a good Wi-Fi signal and so on and so forth would be really, really help. Make sure you're in a quiet location so you're not disturbed. There's no background noise. Choose a light, bright room so that you can be seen. Try and get a neutral background. On some platforms, you can actually you can blur the background, which can also help. And make sure you're central in the screen so that you can be seen clearly by whoever's interviewing you. And obviously make sure there's no distractions. You don't want your phone going off during the interview. And try and practice your interview beforehand. I'll talk a bit more about that later on, about how you can do that. So you're not relying on notes. And it's really important to be enthusiastic. It's much easier when you're actually face-to-face, but over a virtual interview, try and let your enthusiasm shine through. And I would recommend that you're ready for your interview a good 15 minutes before it actually takes place. Now, one thing I think is really important is you understand the school that you've applied to. The first question I always ask candidates when they come to my school is, why do you want to work at Bower Park Academy? And the reason why I do that is I want people that actually really understand the school, know what type of school we are, what we stand for, what our values and our vision is, and they can fully sign up to those. So it's really important that you find out as much as you can about the school. So obviously you can look at their website, you can read Ofsted reports, and you can find other information, look at the exam results, so on and so forth. Just one note of caution about Ofsted reports is check when the last inspection was, because obviously some schools haven't been inspected for quite a long time, especially if they're outstanding. So you just be prepared for that sort of thing. And in doing so, and having all that information about the school, then you can have questions that you may well want to ask about the school, and then you can show that you've got insight into how the school operates. You may also want to look a bit further afield and research the local area of where the school comes from, and possibly find out who will actually be interviewing you. Find out a little bit more about them. Obviously, platforms like LinkedIn, you can find out about the head teacher and anyone else who might be involved in the interview. And consider what value you could add. So one of the things I always look for when I'm interviewing candidates is what difference are they going to make to this school, whether that's immediately or whether that might be in the future. But obviously, if you know what the school offers, then you may be a bit more insightful in terms of what you could add. Now, it's very important that you, although it's a virtual interview and you may be sitting at home, is that you present yourself professionally. So it's really important that you dress as if you were actually going to the school itself to be interviewed. And I think that's important for two reasons. Firstly, I think it's important in terms of it puts you in the right frame of mind for being interviewed. But secondly, it will give a very clear indication to whoever's interviewing you that you are a very professional person, and that you take your responsibilities in terms of being a professional seriously. So obviously for gentlemen, that would be a suit and tie. For women, it would be smart business dress. And obviously avoid casual clothing, too much jewelry, and anything that will actually put doubt in the mind of the person interviewing you. So preparing for the interview. So obviously you don't know exactly what you're going to be asked, but you know roughly what you might be asked. So prepare and practice. Get someone to interview you and ask certain questions so that you can practice answering the questions in a good way. There are usually questions that you're going to be asked around your subject knowledge, about your lesson planning and implementation, about how you assess, about behaviour management, your professional development, what you've done in the past to actually prepare yourself for the post. They're going to try and find out how much you love teaching, how much you really want young people to succeed, the ones that you teach. And you're inevitably going to be asked a child protection question. So it'd be a good point to think about some of those questions and jot down what you might say and practice answering those questions. So here are a sample of some questions that you might be asked. So very recently I was involved in some recruitment overseas, working with teaching, and I asked head teachers across the London Borough of Havering what questions they normally ask when interviewing candidates. And there was a great deal of similarity between the questions. So you will be asked questions about where you've worked before, what sort of demographic, what type of school it was. You'll be asked questions about how you would evaluate your own strengths and weaknesses, because I asked that question because I want to know how reflective the candidate is. There's a great deal of emphasis on curriculum now in schools. So what are your curriculum strengths? You'll be asked about that so that you, the head teacher can gauge whether or not you're going to add to the school. They want to know about your knowledge of teaching and learning, about pedagogy. So what makes a good or an outstanding lesson? How do you ensure that students make progress? Because obviously that's really important for all of us. How do you make sure that they're engaged in their lessons, that they stay on task? How inclusive are you? Do you consider all ability ranges in your groups, the students with special needs and those more able students? And about creating a positive learning environment, about behaviour management. That will be really important because obviously through a virtual interview, we're not seeing you teach. Therefore, we want to know what your knowledge and understanding about good behaviour management would be. And then what else could you add? What else could you add in addition to being a teacher? What extra activities have you been involved in? What might you want to contribute to the school should you be appointed? And inevitably, you're going to be asked something about safeguarding. So very often I would ask a question that would say, what would you do if you noticed something that caused you concern? Or what would you do if a child disclosed to you? Or what would you do if a child said to you, I want to tell you something, but you have to keep it a secret? So those sorts of questions you need to be prepared for. And here's some tips about how to answer those questions successfully. So the first thing is plan ahead, anticipate what you might be asked, So then you can prepare, and as I said before, practice, get someone to practice asking you those questions so you can practice answering them. And it's really important that you try to be yourself, try and be as relaxed as possible, so that your personality shines through and your passion for teaching shines through, which is really, really important. But don't be worried if you're a little bit nervous, because that's natural, because that shows that you care and that you want to do well. So nobody's going to penalise you for that. And don't be afraid to smile, because obviously, you know, I always try and make the candidates as relaxed as possible when they're being interviewed. So if you can smile and be positive, that would be really important. And body language is important as well, because obviously that shows something about your professionalism. And as much as possible, answer the questions as directly, succinctly, and to the point as possible. Don't waffle. So to give you an example, if you were asked a question about behaviour management, a good way to do that, approach that, would say, well, I think there are 4 key elements around good behaviour management in school. The first is to plan lessons that are really engaging so that students want to behave and do well. The second thing is to have high expectations of students in terms of their behaviour and their learning. The third might be to make sure you create a positive learning environment, reward the students that are doing well, and reward the successes. And a fourth element would be to make sure you follow the school's behaviour policy and you follow through on any sanctions. So be succinct and to the point. And if you can, try and provide examples from your own practice. It always shows that you've actually done it before. Even if you didn't get things right and you've learned from those errors, drawing on your past experience is really important, because it shows a depth of knowledge. And don't be afraid to ask for a question to be repeated. Sometimes questions can be quite long, so even halfway through answering, ask for it to be repeated. And there's certainly nothing wrong in taking your time before answering. I always think that shows that the candidate is thinking before they actually give their answer. And if you think about it as teachers, that's what we expect students to do, to think before they actually answer. And prepare some questions of your own to ask at the end of the interview. And coming on to that, obviously an interview is a two-way process. Obviously the school is checking to see whether you're the right candidate for them, but you also need to be checking to make sure it's the right school for you. And I think that's very important, and that's why those questions at the end can be significant if there's any things that you want to clarify. So make sure that if you get the chance to ask questions, you ask things about what's expected of me, ask about your timetable, your teaching load, ask about what support you'll be giving as an NQT in terms of mentor, and ask about other professional development opportunities. And I always like it when candidates ask me that, because that shows that they're thinking ahead, they're thinking about how they're going to grow and develop as a teacher, and possibly as a future leader with some responsibility. Now, as I said before, because we're not doing lesson observations, it may well be that schools may ask you to have other stuff available during the virtual interview. And also you might want to have things available to show the person interviewing you. So that as you can see from the slide, there are a number of things that you could consider. A portfolio. And obviously if you're an art teacher or a design technology teacher, it's quite common to actually have a portfolio to show your own work. And make that available to the people interviewing you. You might have examples of your marking, of planning, a unit of work that you've taught. You may have available a report that's been prepared on you to exemplify your teaching. And also, obviously, if you're being interviewed, the school will ask for references. And one thing that's really important is that you tell whoever's writing that reference that you are being interviewed. So that when the reference is called, they are ready for that. So let them know they may be contacted, and make sure you've got their contact details so you can pass those on. And it's quite good really to finish on a positive note, and I think that always comes over well. So after all the interview and you've asked your questions, try and prepare your elevator pitch, which is kind of a last minute sale of yourself. So one sentence which kind of would show why they should hire you, what difference are you going to make? And one thing that's really important is if you're going to make a difference, it's about making a difference to the children in the school. What impact are you going to have on those children? Obviously in that elevator pitch, say that if you were offered the job that you would accept it, and then thank them for the opportunity to be interviewed. And I think that's always comes over really, really positively. So in summarising, some final tips for you to consider. The first thing is be punctual. So when the call comes, you're sitting there ready. So as we said earlier, perhaps try and be 10, 15 minutes sitting there ready, because it may come a little bit earlier. That body language is really important, that eye-to-eye contact, sitting up straight and looking purposeful. Listen really carefully to the questions and answer succinctly, and where you can, try and draw on examples from your own experience, and also try and show in your answers that what you're saying is going to, what impact that is going to have, because that is really important. And obviously be diplomatic and be polite and professional at all times, and try and finish the interview well with your elevator pitch, your sentence that actually summarises why you should be appointed. So the next step for you is to get your application started. After this session, send your CV or your questions to Teach-In, and the email address is on the screen at nqtpool@teachin.co.uk. Then a teaching consultant will be in touch with you to discuss your ideal school and the location of where you want to work. And then Teach-In can work behind the scenes to actually try and match you to the best possible job for you. And that service is free, and you will be employed directly by your school, and as I said earlier, paid on the Teachers' National Pay Scale. So a final point from me is there is a job out there with your name on it, so I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully you will have a successful interview, and you will be appointed to a teaching post in September and start your career successfully. So good luck and goodbye from me.